As the crowd watches in amazement, the camera zooms in on the white marble mansion, a symbol of luxury and corruption. Inside, politicians and businessmen toast as if nothing were happening, unaware that the castle of secrets was about to collapse. This is a story of wealth, betrayal and power, where every detail can change the fate of a dynasty. If you too want to discover how far greed can take a man, follow this channel now and like the video so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey. The mansion's main hall gleamed beneath golden chandeliers, reflecting crystal glasses, clinking in promising toasts. There, men in impeccable suits and women draped in expensive gowns laughed at rehearsed jokes as if the scandal on the streets were merely a distant rumor. But the truth was already circulating in whispers, spreading faster than the wine served at the tables. The fortune that sustained this empire had deeper roots than any guest dared admit. Senator Richard Coleman, the central figure of the evening, smiled for the cameras with the same trained face as always. Behind the smile, however, lurked the fear of imminent ruin. His allies knew that the contracts signed in silence carried more than figures. They carried secrets capable of derailing entire careers. Every glance exchanged in the room seemed further confirmation that the betrayal was already underway. The political empire, built on bribes and empty promises, threatened to crumble. At the top table, a young undercover journalist watched intently. She had anonymously received an envelope containing evidence of dirty dealings linking Coleman to shell companies in Miami and New York. Her heart pounded with the adrenaline of discovery, but she knew that revealing everything at that moment would mean putting her own life at risk. The power of hidden wealth was more lethal than any weapon. As the guests danced, discreet servants walked the aisles with silver trays. One of them, with a watchful eye and silent steps, knew secrets that could never be revealed. Documents hidden in secret vaults had already passed through his hands, and he understood that each signature represented a pact of corruption. Betrayal, here, was not the exception, but the rule. In the torchlit garden, businessmen toasted with forced laughter. They talked about public projects that would never get off the ground, but which were already filling international accounts with hidden dollars. Among them was a newly elected mayor who owed his victory to the dark money channeled by Coleman. That toast, more than a celebration, was a silent pact of loyalty and fear. From inside the mansion, the sound of a piano sounded delicate, but it masked tense discussions in private rooms. Behind solid wood doors, illegal contracts were being reviewed, clause by clause. Trusted men exchanged nervous glances, aware that the press was already knocking at the door. The collapse of the political empire seemed inevitable, but each still believed they could escape with their share of the fortune. The night wore on, and with it paranoia grew. A simple text message on a cell phone could mean another leak. Who was reporting it? Who was recording? Coleman, champagne flute in hand, hid it well, but his expression betrayed his anguish. He knew that the downfall of tycoons always began with an internal traitor. On the mansion's balcony, the senator's wife wore a cold smile. Dressed in red, she looked like a queen on her golden throne. But behind her perfect image, she hid deep resentments. She knew her husband's lovers, the bribes he accepted, and the price they would all pay. Deep down, her expression wasn't one of pride, but of calculation. Inside a private office, a black folder rested on the mahogany desk. Inside were contracts directly linking Coleman to shell companies in the Caribbean. Only 3 people had access to these documents: the senator, a trusted associate, and the family lawyer. Any leak would expose not just one man, but an entire network of corruption rooted in Washington. Outside, the media cameras waited patiently. They knew that sooner or later someone would emerge with a look of defeat written all over their face. The flashbulbs were already ready to capture the first crack in the castle of illusions. Every second of silence was filled with the anticipation of the revelation, and at the heart of it all, the senator toasted as if he still held the upper hand. But deep down he knew the fortune that sustained him was not eternal. The marble walls might seem indestructible, but the weight of secrets corroded every brick. The question was no longer if it would fall, but when. Coleman's path to that luxurious hall seemed impeccable to outsiders. The son of a traditional Washington family, he studied at top universities and built a meteoric political career. His fiery speeches on justice and development won over crowds. But few knew that from an early age his true foundation was built on dirty dealings. The fortune that accompanied him came not just from votes, but from hidden agreements. In the halls of Capitol Hill, Coleman was treated like a visionary. Always surrounded by lobbyists, he promised economic growth in exchange for silent favors. Every law passed hid clauses that benefited friendly companies, which in turn filled secret coffers in international banks. His public image was one of integrity, but behind the scenes, secrets were already currency. It was during the construction of a mega real estate development in New York that Coleman solidified his empire. The project, marketed as a symbol of prosperity, hid inflated contracts and millions in bribes. Contractors smiled for the cameras as they signed documents tainted with corruption. The press reported progress, but the hidden documents revealed political treachery and murky money. With each hushed-up scandal, the network of allies grew. Mayors, city councilors, and governors owed favors to the senator. It was an invisible empire, sustained by pacts of silence and fear. Anyone who dared break the agreement faced public destruction. For Coleman, controlling minor politicians was like playing chess. Every piece moved was another guarantee that his fortune would never be exposed. In Miami, beachfront mansions became hideouts for discreet meetings. There, Coleman hosted businessmen connected to casinos and gambling houses. The sound of the waves mingled with low voices sealing illegal contracts. The lavish parties hid the weight of secrets. Champagne might be sweet, but it had the bitter taste of betrayal. His closest allies believed they were building a legacy. They cited schools, hospitals, and roads as justification for the inflated budgets. But the truth was, each project bore the mark of overbilling. To the public, Coleman was a symbol of progress. To the conspirators, he was a guarantee that the machine of corruption would never stop. Newspapers published smiling photos of Coleman at inaugurations. Behind the smile, however, there was always a handshake with a hidden price. Documents circulated in sealed envelopes, passing from one aide to the next. Each signature represented another link in the chain of dirty money. The more the empire grew, the more fragile it became. Coleman's personal attorney, Harold Green, was the keeper of many secrets. With his grey suit and calculating gaze, he knew his life depended on silence. He kept copies of wills, contracts, and even bank records. For him, loyalty meant survival. But he also knew that at some point he would be forced to choose between protecting the senator and saving himself. The senator's wife, Evelyn, lived a life of luxury. Haute couture gowns, international travel, and parties in Los Angeles were part of her routine, but the glitter hid deep hurts. She knew about every marital betrayal, every lover hidden in expensive hotels. Silence was bought with jewels, but resentment built like wildfire. Among the guests at his parties, there was always a suspicious face. Businessmen with ties to the Chicago Mafia, Las Vegas casino investors, and even Hollywood figures seeking political favors. Each gathering seemed like a celebration, but in reality, it was a web of dangerous alliances. Coleman's fortune was tied to hands that could crush him at any moment. In San Francisco, Coleman invested in tech startups. Young visionaries received millions in exchange for political loyalty. Many believed they were revolutionizing the future, but unbeknownst to them, they became pawns in a money laundering scheme. For Coleman, each company was another front for expanding his network of shady dealings. Over time, rumors surfaced that Coleman had secret safes scattered across different states. Inside them lay not only money, but also compromising documents, photographs, contracts, and letters that could destroy allies if they fell into the wrong hands. The senator wielded these secrets as weapons, ensuring that no one would dare betray him. But ironically, it was this very strategy that sowed the seeds of his downfall. In Washington, critical voices were beginning to rise. Small, independent journalists exposed irregularities, but were quickly silenced. The power of Coleman's fortune bought silence, headlines, and even careers. But the more he tried to suppress the rumors, the more they seemed to resurface. Absolute control began to slip through his fingers. The Coleman children, raised in luxury, believed the empire was indestructible. Mansions, luxury cars, and overseas travel were their reality. But within the family, distrust was beginning to grow. One of them, ambitious and impatient, began to question where so much money was coming from. This time, the betrayal might come from within the family. In Congress, political rivals waited for the right moment to strike. They knew that at some point, secrets would come to light. They gathered information in silence, building dossiers that could explode at any moment. For them, Coleman's downfall would be not only justice, but also an opportunity to rise. Despite the growing tension, Coleman maintained his poise. In fiery speeches, he spoke about ethics and family values. The crowd applauded, unaware that each word concealed an empire of corruption. His greatest talent was not legislating, but acting. Politics for him had always been theater, and the stage was about to collapse. A dinner in Dallas would become the turning point. Surrounded by oil executives, Coleman made bold promises. In return, he received suitcases full of hidden dollars. It was at this point that one of his allies realized the senator was no longer just powerful, he was dangerous. The dirty money was beginning to weigh heavily, threatening everyone around him. Behind the scenes at that dinner, a phrase echoed in a low voice. "A man who keeps so many secrets will sooner or later be destroyed by them." The phrase seemed like just another comment, but it carried the weight of a prophecy. In that instant, Coleman's destiny began to change. The seemingly eternal rise showed signs of an inevitable fall. The morning after the dinner in Dallas, an anonymous envelope arrived at the offices of a small investigative newspaper. Inside were copies of contracts signed by Coleman, proving illegal payments to mayors of strategic cities. The editor, leafing through the pages, realized it was pure dynamite. The decision to publish it or not could change not only a career, but the political fate of the nation. Meanwhile, at Harold Green's law firm, tensions were rising. A mysterious client had paid to have certain documents kept out of the reach of authorities. Green knew it could cost him his career, but he also understood that giving up the black briefcase was signing his own death sentence. The lawyer was caught between loyalty and survival. Senator Coleman, unaware of the leak, was speaking at a charity event in New York. He spoke about social justice while the spotlight shone on his impeccable suit. The audience applauded, unaware that, just a few miles away, journalists were preparing the headline that could shatter his savior image. It was as if two parallel realities collided. Back in Washington, Evelyn watched her husband on television. She knew every word was rehearsed, every gesture calculated, but in his eyes, she saw only a cornered man. Silently, she wondered, when the secrets finally came to light, would she be dragged along? The red dress she wore seemed like armor against the impending shame. In the political world, rumors circulated at alarming speed. Representatives whispered in the halls of Congress, speculating about the next steps. Some discreetly distanced themselves from the senator, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Others, bolder, approached him to negotiate final favors before the castle of fortune collapsed. Coleman's eldest son, Alexander, began to suspect. One quiet night, he broke into his father's office and found the famous black briefcase locked in a drawer. Upon opening it, he found documents detailing offshore accounts and suspicious transfers. The shock was immediate. For the first time, he realized that the family fortune was built on betrayal and corruption. Alexander wavered between loyalty and denunciation. He knew that exposing his father would mean destroying his own luxurious future, but he also understood that living under the shadow of dirty dealings was too heavy a burden. He kept digital copies of the papers, knowing that one day he would have to decide what to do with them. The seed of rebellion within the family had been planted. During the same period, the undercover journalist managed to photograph the secret meeting between Coleman and businessmen linked to the Chicago Mafia. The images showed handshakes, envelopes being exchanged, and nervous glances. Alongside the photos, she wrote, "Visual evidence of high-level corruption." That was no longer a rumor, it was concrete evidence. In Las Vegas, Coleman sought to expand his network. Millionaire gamblers financed campaigns in exchange for political favors. At champagne-soaked parties, the senator promised legislation that would crack down on money laundering. But as he celebrated, someone watched him from afar, an undercover federal agent. Secrets were about to emerge from the darkness. On Capitol Hill, pressure mounted. Investigative committees began demanding formal explanations. Aides worked day and night, trying to suppress leaks. His fortune, once seen as a symbol of power, was now an anchor dragging the senator down. It was impossible to keep the mask intact when so many hands were vying for the pieces of his empire. Houston's oil-related businessmen began to worry. They had invested millions in Coleman's career and now feared losing everything. In discreet meetings, they discussed cutting ties before it was too late. The betrayal no longer came just from the press or his family, but from the very allies who had once sworn eternal loyalty. Evelyn, increasingly distant from her husband, received an unexpected proposal. A journalist promised to protect her in exchange for information. Silently, she recalled every marital betrayal, every secret kept against her will. The temptation to turn on her husband grew. After all, who better to bring down a tycoon than his own wife? One rainy night, Harold Green was rushed to the mansion. Coleman wanted to discuss the possibility of destroying compromising documents. The pale-faced lawyer hesitated. He knew it might further incriminate him, but when he looked into the senator's eyes, he saw not just fear, but desperation. The downfall seemed inevitable, and he didn't want to be dragged down with it. The younger Coleman children began to notice changes. Extra guards at the mansion, locked doors, suspicious glances. The luxury that had once seemed natural now tasted bitter and imprisoned. They no longer lived in a house, but in a gilded vault. Fear, once invisible, had become part of their daily routine. Meanwhile, in Miami, a secret bank account was frozen by court order. More than $50 million disappeared from Coleman's hands in a single night. It was the first visible sign of the financial collapse. The senator, upon being informed, threw a crystal goblet against the wall. The fortune he believed untouchable was crumbling. Chicago newspapers featured on the cover "Senator linked to illegal contracts." Headlines spread at record speed. The country began to question the depth of the system's rot. Public trust, carefully built over decades, evaporated in days. The empire's collapse was no longer a hypothesis. It was an ongoing fact. During a party in Los Angeles, surrounded by Hollywood actors and moguls, Coleman received a phone call. The voice on the other end informed him that photos of suspicious encounters would be published in less than 48 hours. The senator, sweating, left the party without saying goodbye. For the first time, the man who controlled so many seemed to have no control at all. In Congress, Allies pressed for explanations, but with each answer, Coleman sank deeper. Questions about tax havens, inflated contracts, and bribes multiplied. It was like fighting an unstoppable tide. The empire that had taken decades to build was crumbling in weeks. Internal betrayals began to intensify. Former friends handed over information in exchange for immunity. The circle of trust dwindled to almost nothing. The senator, surrounded by shadows, no longer knew who to trust. Paranoia consumed him day and night. Alexander, torn between filial love and indignation, decided to act. He gathered evidence and began sending anonymous copies to journalists. He wanted the truth to come out, but he didn't want to be identified. The young man knew the empire had to fall, even if it meant destroying his own family. Harold Green, pressured by veiled threats, decided to create a parallel dossier. He stored copies of everything in a safe in Chicago. For him, it was his only guarantee of survival if he were betrayed by the senator. Each archived page was a silent stab in the client's back. In Washington, Evelyn watched her husband grow increasingly distant. The glow of dinners had faded. In their place were tense meetings and sleepless nights. She knew the end was near, and deep down she wondered whether she should mourn the ruin or celebrate the liberation. The FBI officially joined the case. Teams combed through bank records, contracts, and campaign donations. The senator still tried to maintain optimistic speeches, but he was already seen as a condemned man. Every camera flash seemed like a shot to the back of his head. The stage that had crowned him now crushed him. The streets of Washington began to fill with protests. Signs demanded justice. Young people chanted against corruption. Coleman's name was chanted as a symbol of political betrayal. The fortune that once brought respect now attracted hatred. The people finally saw what was hidden behind the marble curtains. During a private dinner in Houston, oil executives confronted him. They wanted assurances that their investments wouldn't be lost. Coleman, for the first time, had no answers. His silence was more frightening than any public scandal. The tycoons understood that the ship was sinking. The press refused to back down. Each day brought a new revelation. Mistresses supported by public funds, luxurious trips paid for by illegal contracts, safes full of hidden dollars. The senator could no longer distinguish where truth ended and betrayal began. The empire's collapse was complete. Amidst the chaos, Evelyn made a decision. She sought out a reporter and handed him a key. It was the key to a safe deposit box in New York, where devastating documents were stored. As she handed over the key, she simply said, "He always believed that fortune would protect him, but it was fortune that destroyed him." This final revelation paved the way for his ultimate downfall. When the New York safe was opened, it revealed contracts, photos, and lists of names linking Coleman to figures across the country. The conspiracy was not just political, but national. And in that instant, everyone understood. The hidden millionaire fortune that controlled power had finally been exposed. The New York vault had been opened in front of cameras and federal authorities. Inside, stacks of documents revealed decades of illegal contracts, international transfers, and evidence of bribery. The country watched in shock as the names of mayors, governors, and businessmen were named. The conspiracy was no longer just about one man, but about an entire power structure. That same night, TV shows aired heated debates. Experts discussed how Coleman's hidden fortune had influenced elections, business deals, and even court decisions. The outraged public clamored for justice. Each revelation increased the pressure on the government, which could no longer feign ignorance. The empire's collapse became a national spectacle. Meanwhile, in Washington, political allies raced to save their reputations. Secret meetings took place in discreet hotels, where defense plans were devised. Many tried to disassociate themselves from the senator, erasing records and destroying evidence. But the FBI moved quickly. closing in on every suspected ally. The web of betrayal expanded. Evelyn watched everything from her mansion in silence. She knew her decision to hand over the safe key had triggered her downfall. Some called her a traitor, others a heroine. For her, there was no victory, only survival. The red dress was now put away, replaced by dark clothes that reflected her new status as the social widow of a man still alive. Alexander, the eldest son, watched the news with a mixture of guilt and relief. His digital copies had been an essential part of the investigation, but he knew the price would be high. The Coleman family name was destroyed forever. The family's luxury was now synonymous with public shame. Harold Green, the lawyer, was subpoenaed to testify. Sitting before prosecutors, he kept a cool face as he answered sharp questions. He knew every word could save or condemn him. But he also carried a trump card, the secret dossier kept in Chicago. This file was his bargaining chip, his guarantee that he wouldn't be dragged along. In the press, headlines featured unexpected names: Hollywood stars, San Francisco tech entrepreneurs, and even religious figures appeared linked to the scheme. The conspiracy proved to be broader than anyone imagined. The hidden fortune had brought silence across all sectors of society. In Las Vegas, casino investors trembled. They knew their faces were in photographs inside the vault. Some were already planning to flee abroad, taking suitcases of cash. Others tried to negotiate with federal agents, offering information in exchange for immunity. Every decision was a desperate race against time. Outraged people took to the streets of several cities. Protests in front of the Capitol demanded not only Coleman's arrest, but a sweeping cleanup of the political system. Signs with slogans like "Dirty Fortune," "Betrayed Country Multiplied." The voice of the streets could no longer be ignored. The empire was crumbling under the weight of public opinion. Inside the mansion, Coleman tried to maintain his composure. Surrounded by aides, he hatched desperate plans. But his gaze betrayed paranoia. He feared even his own servants, convinced that anyone could be a traitor. The marble palace had become a gilded prison, increasingly suffocating. Evelyn received anonymous threats after her betrayal, late-night phone calls, unsigned letters, and suspicious glances at social events. She realized she had crossed a line of no return. Her survival now depended on official protection. But deep down, she knew no guard could protect her from the wrath of those who had lost their fortune and power. In Congress, investigations were moving forward at a rapid pace. Dossiers were read in live-streamed hearings. Each revelation sparked a cascade of scandals. Some politicians resigned before even being formally charged. The domino effect was already underway, and no one knew where it would end. In Miami, authorities raided a mansion linked to the senator. In the hidden safes, they found dollars, euros, and even gold bars. The images circulated throughout the country, symbolizing excess and decadence. For the people, the treasure represented corruption embodied. For Coleman, it was the end of the illusion of untouchability. Harold Green, pressured by prosecutors, decided to hand over part of the secret dossier. Each page revealed names and figures, but he kept the most valuable documents as insurance. He knew that in the game of betrayal, survival meant negotiation, and he was willing to sell even his soul to escape prison. Alexander was called to testify before Congress. Trembling but firm, he recounted what he had found in his father's office. His voice echoed across the country, transforming him into a symbol of a generation that would no longer tolerate political secrecy. As he left the hearing, reporters shouted questions. He simply replied, "Fortune is not worth the lost truth." Meanwhile, Coleman was still searching for solutions. He tried to contact international allies, offering secret deals, but no one wanted to associate with a man in freefall. Even foreign tycoons, once his confidants, closed their doors. The isolation became absolute, and loneliness weighed more heavily than any accusation. The protests intensified. In Chicago, demonstrators tore down barricades and stormed public buildings, demanding justice. In New York, giant screens displayed real-time headlines. The entire country seemed to be conspiring against a single man, and for Coleman, every voice on the streets was another blow to his already weakened authority. Evelyn, protected by escorts, reflected on her decision. Deep down, she felt neither pride nor guilt, only a strange sense of emptiness. The empire that had sustained her had disappeared, and with it, her identity. Now she was just a woman who survived the collapse of a tycoon. In the Senate, Coleman's former allies spoke out against him. It was the definitive proof of political betrayal. Those who had applauded him were now publicly stabbing him. The spectacle of his downfall became increasingly cruel. The political arena never spared the weak. In the early hours of the morning, Coleman walked alone through the mansion's corridors. The silence was suffocating. He ran his hand along the marble walls, remembering every party, every victory. Now everything seemed empty, like a luxurious mausoleum. The man who once dominated Washington was reduced to a paranoid shadow. International newspapers began to report on the scandal. Headlines in London, Paris, and Tokyo cited the hidden American fortune. The country's reputation was at stake. Coleman's case was no longer just a national drama, but a global spectacle. The whole world was watching the downfall of a tycoon. In Texas, oil executives burned documents on isolated ranches, trying to cover their tracks before the feds arrived. But the smoke raised suspicions, and soon helicopters were circling overhead. The siege was relentless. The conspiracy was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Coleman, in desperation, called a secret meeting with his sons. He wanted to convince them to remain loyal, but Alexander refused to participate. His silence was more devastating than any words. The senator realized that not even his family was on his side. In the press, journalists celebrated each new revelation. It was the golden age of investigative journalism. Special programs detailed the corruption network, and names were exposed in prime time. For the people, it was collective catharsis. For Coleman, it was public execution without the right to defense. Evelyn, in an exclusive interview, declared that she had always known the secrets. She said the senator believed he was above the law, but forgot that even the greatest fortunes crumble in the face of the truth. Her words resonated like chain stabbing. The audience applauded as Coleman sank deeper into ruin. The FBI intensified its investigation. Wiretaps, intercepted emails, and 24-hour surveillance surrounded the senator. Every movement was recorded, every suspicious contact monitored. The feeling of being watched drove Coleman mad. The man who once controlled everything was now just a prisoner without bars. Behind the scenes, a powerful former ally decided to speak out. He recorded a devastating testimony, revealing details of secret meetings and million-dollar bribes. This testimony would be the final nail in the coffin of the empire. When the video aired on national television, millions watched in absolute silence. The entire country knew this was the beginning of the end. In a final attempt to maintain power, Coleman called a lavish party at his mansion. He wanted to show strength even amidst the chaos. He invited politicians, business people, and journalists. The ballroom was prepared as in the old days, with champagne, chandeliers, and music. But everyone knew that this night would not be a celebration, but a judgment. The mansion's ballroom was lit as brightly as in its heyday. Golden chandeliers hung over lavish tables. Crystal glasses clinked to the sound of an orchestra. Guests wore their finest clothes, but behind the smiles lay a nervous silence. Everyone knew this evening wasn't a celebration, but a farewell show. Coleman entered the room, wearing the same impeccable suit as always. A practiced smile was on his face, but his weary gaze betrayed the weight of ruin. As he raised his glass to toast, he noticed that many were averting their eyes. Former allies no longer saw him as a leader, but as a doomed man. The empire he had built was beginning to crumble before their very eyes. The orchestra played soft music, but each chord sounded like a funeral bell. In the corner, discreet reporters recorded every detail. The dinner that was supposed to symbolize strength now became a stage for conspiracy. Amidst the porcelain dishes and expensive wines, whispered phrases carried the venom of betrayal. The hidden fortune was about to be publicly unmasked. Evelyn appeared in an elegant black dress, contrasting with the red of the past. She walked through the room with a firm posture, as if she were no longer a wife, but a witness. Her gaze met her husband's for only a moment. The silence between them said more than any speech. She knew that night would end in ruin. Alexander, the eldest son, was also present. Sitting at the table, he watched his father's every move. He knew that much of the evidence against him had come from his hands. He felt a bitter mixture of guilt and relief. The fall everyone was expecting was also his own liberation. At one point in the evening, an oil businessman stood to make a toast. His words were cold, almost calculated. He spoke of new times, of political renewal. Coleman sensed the stab between the lines. The betrayal, once whispered, was now declared in public. The senator swallowed the wine as if it were poison. Outside, TV cameras waited anxiously. Live broadcasts showed the hustle and bustle of the party. Journalists chronicled every arrival, every tense look. The entire country was glued to their screens, waiting for the moment when the mask would finally fall. The climax wasn't just political, it was media-driven. Suddenly, the ballroom doors burst open. Federal agents entered, interrupting the music and toasts. The sound of boots echoed across the marble as the guests froze in silence. Evelyn closed her eyes, as if she had already anticipated this moment. Coleman remained standing, but his hands trembled. The chief agent announced loudly, "Senator Richard Coleman, you are under arrest for corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy against the state." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some rose in terror, others remained paralyzed. The hidden fortune now had an inescapable price: public humiliation. Coleman tried to react. He raised his voice, saying it was all a setup, that there was no evidence, but at that moment a giant screen came on in the room. Journalists had managed to project documents and images extracted from the New York vault. There were the signatures, the secret accounts, the photos of the clandestine meetings. There was no longer any denial. Evelyn looked at her husband for the last time. Her eyes showed no hatred, but a profound emptiness. The woman who had once believed in power now saw only the shadow of a broken man. Without a word, she turned and left the room. For Coleman, this departure hurt more than the handcuffs. Alexander remained seated, watching the scene in silence. He wanted to believe there was still a father behind the corrupt politician, but when he saw the officers handcuff his wrists, he realized the father figure was gone. All that remained was a fallen tycoon, imprisoned by his own greed. The guests began to disperse. Some tried to leave discreetly, others took the opportunity to publicly distance themselves from the senator. The hall, once the scene of lavish parties, now resembled a makeshift courtroom. The conspiracy was reaching its peak, and everyone was trying to save their own skin. Outside, cameras captured Coleman being escorted away. Flashbulbs popped like gunshots, illuminating the Washington night. The senator held his head high, but the lost look in his eyes showed his mind was already in ruins. Fortune hadn't protected him. On the contrary, it was the trap that had destroyed him. Inside the hall, the orchestra stopped playing. Absolute silence echoed louder than any music. All that remained were half-full glasses, untouched plates, and stunned faces. The luxurious dinner had become a symbolic wake for a political empire. The officers led Coleman to a black car parked in front of the mansion. As he entered, he looked out the window and saw the crowd chanting his name in anger. Signs demanded justice, voices demanding punishment. The man who had once been hailed was now a symbol of political betrayal. As the car drove away, Evelyn watched from the balcony. She felt the cold night wind against her face. She knew her life would never be the same, but at least she was free from the emotional prison she had lived in. For the first time in years, she breathed without weight. The euphoric reporters relayed every detail in real time. Headlines appeared in seconds. Coleman's remains, the empire of corruption crumbles. The show reached millions of homes. For the people, it was the triumph of truth over dirty fortune. Alexander left the party without looking back. He walked the streets of Washington, lost in thought. He knew his family's story would be remembered as a symbol of greed and ruin, but he also knew he needed to rebuild his own identity away from that tarnished family name. That night, Washington didn't sleep. On every street corner, in every bar, all anyone could talk about was the senator's arrest. The man who controlled contracts, elections, and fortunes was now just a common prisoner. The climax of the conspiracy had become reality before millions of witnesses. Inside the police car, Coleman closed his eyes. He remembered the lavish dinners, the trips, the promises. Everything seemed distant, as if it was someone else's life. Now, all that remained was the metallic sound of handcuffs and the emptiness of a fall with no return. In the corridors of power, allies tried to reshuffle the board. Some planned to fill his vacant position. Others feared their own names would surface in the next scandals. The conspiracy didn't end with Coleman. It simply changed protagonists. The guests, still in the hall, whispered. Some spoke of betrayal, others of justice. But all knew they had witnessed a historic chapter. Luxury and power turned to ruin before their eyes. Evelyn went back inside and walked to the office. She sat in her husband's chair and surveyed the walls covered in books and diplomas. Everything seemed empty, like the sets of an abandoned theater. For the first time, she realized that the real secret lay not in the documents, but in the illusion of power everyone had believed. Late that night, the mansion fell silent. Federal guards searched every room, collecting evidence. The marble palace was no longer a symbol of wealth, but a crime scene. Fortune had become a curse. As Coleman was taken to prison, thousands commented on social media. Memes, videos, and headlines went viral. The tycoon's downfall became a digital spectacle. The truth spread faster than any fortune could buy. And in the heart of the city, in front of the Capitol, a protester held up a sign illuminated by cameras. The truth always comes out. This phrase echoed throughout the country, sealing the evening's mood. The climax was complete. The empire had fallen, and with it the mask of corruption. Coleman's arrest dominated the headlines the next morning. Newspapers carried the headlines in bold letters, "The empire has crumbled." Images of the handcuffed senator were broadcast on every television screen, repeated in slow motion. For the public, that moment represented the symbolic funeral of an era of corruption. The country seemed to be waking from a golden nightmare. In front of the Capitol, crowds celebrated. Fireworks exploded in the sky as if it were a national victory. Young people carried signs with slogans of indignation and hope. For the first time in decades, they believed that justice could prevail over power. Coleman's name, once synonymous with wealth, was now a symbol of betrayal. In the halls of Congress, the atmosphere was tense. Politicians exchanged nervous glances, aware that the investigations could affect them too. Impassioned speeches echoed, but few could hide their fear. The domino effect was already underway, and no one knew who would be next. The collapse of one tycoon exposed an entire rotten structure. Coleman's mansion became a stage for an excavation. Federal agents searched every room, opening drawers, breaking open safes and photographing documents. The gleaming marble was now covered in dust and boot prints. The quiet luxury contrasted with the brutality of the investigation. The castle of secrets had become an open prison. Evelyn watched everything on television, isolated in a hotel room. Her image, once associated with glamour, was now the subject of speculation. Journalists questioned whether she had been an accomplice or merely a victim. Silently, she knew she had been both. Her life of luxury had become a shadowy one. Alexander, on the other hand, was beginning to be treated as a hero. His decision to release the documents sparked debate in the media. Some called him a traitor, others a symbol of truth. The young man, still torn by conflicting feelings, avoided interviews. He knew that any word could reignite deep wounds. In the federal penitentiary, Coleman received the same treatment as any other prisoner. No privileges, no luxuries. His meals were simple, and the silence of the cells weighed heavily on his mind. The man who controlled million-dollar contracts was now reduced to a number in the system. His downfall had never seemed so complete. The press was relentless. Special programs retraced his trajectory, from his first steps in politics to his final collapse. Old photos appeared in stark contrast to the prison footage. For the audience, it was an irresistible spectacle. The lost fortune fueled the collective hunger for justice. The protests spread to other cities. In Chicago, demonstrators demanded investigations into mayors. In Miami, signs called for audits of construction projects. The conspiracy dismantled by Coleman now served as fuel for the exposure of other corruption networks. The effect multiplied beyond Washington's borders. In the courts, cases began to pile up. Businessmen, politicians, and advisors were summoned to testify. Each hearing revealed new details, new betrayals. The judicial system seemed to finally act against an empire that had remained untouchable for so long. Justice moved with heavy but firm steps. Some former allies mysteriously disappeared. Rumors circulated about escapes abroad, false identities, and fortunes hidden in tax havens. Coleman's trail stretched across the globe. It was impossible to contain all the consequences of decades of dirty dealings. The conspiracy unfolded like a never-ending web. Meanwhile, the people demanded reforms. Voices called for profound changes in campaign financing, contract transparency, and the political system itself. The fall of one man revealed the fragility of an entire country in the face of greed. The moral of the story seemed clear. Wealth without ethics is just ruin postponed. In the international media, Coleman was treated as an example of the collapse of tycoons. Headlines in London called him the dirty money senator. In Paris, newspapers spoke of the America's lost fortune. The world watched the scandal with a mixture of shock and curiosity. It was a portrait of global corruption. Evelyn, in an exclusive interview, revealed intimate details. She spoke about marital betrayals, nights when her husband planned illegal contracts, and the silence bought with jewelry. Her words divided opinions. For some, it was the confession of an accomplice. For others, the liberation of an invisible prisoner. Alexander received invitations from universities to lecture on ethics and civic courage. Young people saw in him an example that truth could defeat empires. But the weight of the decision still haunted him. His father's downfall was also his own scar. He carried not only the memory of a political betrayal, but also of a destroyed family. Inside the penitentiary, Coleman began to lose emotional control. He talked to himself, relived past speeches, and screamed at invisible enemies. Guards reported nighttime crises in which he begged for his fortune back. The psychological ruin was more cruel than the physical imprisonment. The tycoon was broken inside. The symbolic burial took place on a television program. Journalists showed footage of his rise and fall, accompanied by scathing commentary. For millions of viewers, it was the final burial of the myth. Fortune had not withstood the weight of truth, and the country moved on, leaving behind the ruins of a man who believed himself invincible. That week, the moral seemed clear to all. No hidden fortune stands the test of time. Secrets always find a way to emerge. Betrayal may yield momentary power, but it exacts an eternal price. Coleman's collapse wasn't just his personal downfall. It was a reflection of a nation facing its own demons. The cell was small, cold, and unadorned. The man who once paced marble halls now sat on a concrete bench. The grey walls echoed his heavy breathing. Each minute felt like an eternity. Silence was Coleman's new gilded prison. He still dreamed of the clink of crystal glasses. In the wee hours of the morning, he would wake to imaginary voices calling his name. He saw chandeliers shining on the non-existent ceiling, smelled the scent of expensive wines, but when he opened his eyes, only the dim bulb remained, illuminating his defeat. Luxury was now just a torturous memory. Coleman talked to himself, recalling speeches from the past. He performed for an invisible audience, repeating phrases about ethics and progress. Guards watched him silently, recording his mental breakdown. The man who controlled million-dollar contracts was now a shadow of his former self. In the neighboring cell, other inmates laughed as they listened to his monologues. They called him the Senator of Lost Fortune. Each laugh was a stab at his dignity. He, who used secrets to control men, was now just a laughingstock. The gilded prison was transformed into a stage of humiliation. The letters that arrived were few, some from lawyers, others from people who still believed in his innocence, but none from Evelyn, none from his children. The absence of his family weighed more heavily than any sentence. He finally understood the price of betrayal. At night, he had recurring nightmares. He dreamed he was walking the halls of his mansion, but every door he opened revealed an empty safe. Inside, there was no money, only torn-up contracts and newspaper headlines. His fortune turned to dust before his eyes. Isolation made him distrustful of everyone. He suspected guards were being paid to keep a closer eye on him. He imagined conspiracies even among common prisoners. Paranoia gnawed at his mind. The man who had once controlled the game now felt like a disposable piece. Harold Green, the lawyer, stopped visiting him. The dossier had already served its purpose. Coleman realized that even his last ally had drifted away. The abandonment was absolute. The gilded prison had not walls of gold, but walls of betrayal. One day, he received an old newspaper. On the cover was a photo of Evelyn smiling in an exclusive interview. The headline read, "I always knew." He tore the paper apart in fury, but the words echoed in his mind. The woman he had once loved had sealed his doom. Coleman began counting the days by scratching the wall. Each mark was a reminder of the distance between who he had been and who he had become. The makeshift calendar seemed to mock his downfall. Time, once controlled by luxurious diaries, now dominated him mercilessly. Deep in his cell, only one bitter certainty remained. No fortune, secret, or betrayal could reverse his condition. The gilded prison was the epitome of his life, an empty castle built on corruption and ruin. And now, nothing remained but solitude. The next morning, television replayed the image that had started the whole tragedy. Coleman handcuffed, surrounded by federal agents. The video, replayed tirelessly, became the symbol of the downfall. The entire country relived that moment, now with all its secrets exposed. The narrative closed in on itself, like an inevitable circle. Documentaries began to be produced in a rush. Old headlines were confronted with revealed contracts, creating a clear line between rise and fall. The hidden fortune that moved millions and controlled politicians was now exposed to the world. There were no more masks, only the naked, cruel truth. Evelyn refused to visit her husband in prison. She declared that she no longer wanted to live as a prisoner of secrets. For her, the chapter was closed. Meanwhile, Alexander publicly broke with his family name, taking on a new life far from his father's shadow. The Coleman family, once a symbol of power, was dismantled. In the halls of Congress, new names emerged as successors, but they carried the mark of fear. Everyone knew that the eyes of the press and the people were watching. The political betrayal that destroyed Coleman now served as a warning to an entire generation. The empire of dirty money had become a bitter lesson, and so the loop closed exactly where it began, with the public exposure of a handcuffed man, a symbol of corruption and lost fortune. What had once been an enigma revealed in mysterious files was now a fact before the world. The truth, as always, had prevailed, but the price was the total destruction of a tycoon who believed himself untouchable. Richard Coleman's story revealed the hidden price of greed. He believed his fortune was a shield against the truth, but discovered that corruption always leaves traces. Every dirty contract, every political betrayal, every secret kept in invisible vaults returned to destroy him. His downfall was not only personal, but symbolic. The ruin of a system fueled by dark money. Wealth can buy silence, but it can never buy true loyalty. His wife turned against him. His son exposed his secrets. His allies abandoned him. In the end, only the emptiness of a gilded prison remained. It's a clear lesson. Wealth without integrity is just a sandcastle about to crumble. The people understood this message. On the streets, online, and in the courts, it became clear that the truth always finds a way. The collapse of Coleman's empire showed that no mask lasts forever. The moral is simple and relentless. Secrets may sustain empires for a time, but sooner or later, they are the ones that bring them down. And you, who have followed this journey of power and destruction, know that stories like this are not just fiction, but reflections of a real world where fortunes hide betrayals and conspiracies. That's why every detail needs to be told, so that the lesson hidden among the ruins of tycoons isn't lost. If this story caught your attention, subscribe now to the Hidden Fortunes channel and like this video. This helps us continue bringing you intense stories of fortune, power, and dark secrets, because in the end, there's only one certainty. Greed always takes its toll, and we'll be here to reveal every downfall.